For more than 4 decades, one man has been at the center of American politics. A man who became one of the most powerful senators in modern history. A man who helped reshape the Supreme Court. A man who controlled the Senate agenda. A man who understood Washington better than almost anyone. But after decades of political victories, there is another question being asked across America. Not whether Mitch McConnell was successful, because clearly he was. The question is, successful for who? Because while Washington insiders celebrated his ability to win political battles, millions of Americans looked around and wondered why their own battles were not being won. Why were factories closing? Why were communities struggling? Why did politicians seem to become more powerful while ordinary families felt increasingly ignored? To his supporters, Mitch McConnell is a conservative strategist who delivered historic victories. But to his critics, he became the symbol of everything wrong with Washington. A career politician, a defender of the establishment, a man who mastered a system that many Americans believe is failing them.
I'm exiled to the greener grass, searching for the uncertain haze.
Welcome back to Chomps Talks. I'm Chomps. Today, we're taking a critical look at Mitch McConnell, his rise to power, his political victories, the controversies surrounding his career, and why so many Americans believe his legacy represents the very Washington system they wanted to challenge. To understand Mitch McConnell, you have to understand the system he mastered. McConnell entered the United States Senate in 1985. At the time, few Americans outside Kentucky knew his name. But over the next several decades, he would transform himself from a relatively unknown senator into one of the most influential political figures in America. His political philosophy was built around one idea: power matters. Not popularity, not speeches, power. McConnell understood something many politicians did not. Washington is not just about winning elections, it's about controlling what happens after the election. He mastered Senate procedure. He understood committee assignments. He knew how to build alliances, and he became famous for one thing above all else: knowing exactly where the votes were. His supporters viewed that as leadership. They argued America needed someone who understood the system and knew how to fight for conservative priorities. But his critics saw something different. They argued McConnell became too comfortable inside the very system many Americans wanted changed. Because when someone spends 40 years inside Washington, a fair question emerges. Are they changing the system? Or has the system changed them? One of the biggest reasons Mitch McConnell became a target for criticism is because he represents a political era that many Americans have grown tired of. The era of permanent politicians, a time when elected officials can spend decades moving between campaigns, leadership positions, and Washington institutions. Supporters call that experience. Critics call it disconnect. Because outside of Washington, people are dealing with problems that don't disappear after every election cycle. The cost of living, healthcare expenses, housing costs, declining manufacturing, and communities struggling to replace lost industries. And this is where the criticism of McConnell becomes larger than one person. To many Americans, the problem is not just Mitch McConnell. The problem is a political culture where leaders become experts of maintaining power, but struggle to deliver meaningful change. And this is where the America First movement challenged the old Republican establishment. For decades, traditional Republicans emphasized free markets, lower taxes, international trade, and limited government. But a growing number of voters began asking a different question. Not just, does this policy help the economy, but does this policy help Americans first? That difference became one of the biggest political battles inside the Republican Party. And Mitch McConnell became one of the clearest symbols of that divide. Because the biggest criticism of Mitch McConnell is not that he failed, it's that he succeeded at a version of politics that many Americans no longer believe in. A politics built around Washington strategy, global markets, institutional power, and compromise. But to his critics, America needed something different. Less Washington, more Main Street, less protecting the system, more challenging it. And that brings us to the biggest question surrounding Mitch McConnell's career. Did he protect conservative values, or did he protect Washington itself? To understand why Mitch McConnell became such a controversial figure among many conservative voters, you have to understand the transformation happening inside the Republican Party. For decades, the Republican Party was built around a traditional conservative philosophy: lower taxes, free markets, limited government, strong national defense, and international trade. But over time, a growing number of voters began questioning whether that approach was actually delivering results for the people who supported it. Because while many politicians in Washington talked about economic growth, many communities across America experienced a very different reality. Factories closed. Jobs moved overseas. Entire towns built around manufacturing struggled to survive. And this is where critics argue Mitch McConnell represented the old Republican establishment, the Republican Party that was comfortable with globalization, comfortable with international trade agreements, comfortable with multinational corporations operating around the world. But critics ask a simple question: if a policy creates cheaper products but destroys American jobs, is that really a victory? That question became one of the driving forces behind the American First Movement, a movement that argued government should focus less on global economic systems and more on American workers, less on what benefits corporations, more on what benefits communities. And for many of these voters, Mitch McConnell became the face of a Republican Party that they believed had forgotten them. One of the biggest criticisms surrounding the Washington establishment has always been its relationship with China. For decades, American companies expanded business with China. Supply chains became increasingly dependent on Chinese manufacturing. And many politicians from both parties supported policies that encouraged deeper economic connections. Supporters argued this created lower prices, economic growth, and stronger global markets. Critics argued America became too dependent on a geopolitical competitor while American manufacturing weakened. And this is where critics of McConnell point to a larger issue. They argued that leaders like McConnell were part of a political class that underestimated the consequences of globalization. They believed that Washington focused on economic numbers and stock markets while ignoring the communities left behind. And for many working class Americans, especially in areas affected by manufacturing decline, that frustration became personal. Because politics is not just about statistics. It's about whether people feel like their government sees them. Now, if there is one area where even many critics acknowledge Mitch McConnell's effectiveness, it is the federal judiciary. His biggest political victory was reshaping the courts. And he did it through one of the most controversial moments in modern Senate history. In 2016, after the death of Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, President Barack Obama nominated Merrick Garland to fill the vacancy. McConnell refused to hold a confirmation hearing, arguing that because it was a presidential election year, the next president should make the nomination. Then in 2020, after Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, Republicans moved quickly to confirm Amy Coney Barrett before the presidential election. To McConnell's supporters, this was not hypocrisy, this was politics. They argued that Senate elections have consequences and that McConnell was just doing exactly what voters asked him to do. But critics saw something very different. They argue McConnell changed the rules depending on whether it benefited his side. To them, This represented the larger problem with Washington, a system where principles sometimes become secondary to power. Now, there's no question that McConnell delivered major victories for conservatives. The confirmation of 3 Supreme Court justices under President Trump dramatically changed the ideological balance of the court. For many conservatives, those appointees were the reason they supported him. They point to decisions involving abortion, gun rights, religious liberty, and federal regulations. They argue McConnell understood the importance of long-term strategy. While presidents come and go, judges serve for decades. And from that perspective, McConnell may have achieved more conservative change than almost any politician of his generation. But this is where the debate gets complicated, because a politician can be successful at winning political battles and still face criticism over the condition of the country. And that is exactly what many McConnell critics argue. They say he became a master of political chess while Americans were looking for someone to solve real problems. They argue Washington became obsessed with elections, court appointees, and political strategy, while issues like national debt, immigration, manufacturing, and government spending continued to grow. The criticism is not that McConnell couldn't win. The criticism is that winning in Washington did not always mean winning for everyday Americans. But perhaps no issue damaged the public perception of McConnell's family more than questions surrounding Washington connections, political influence, and China. Because when Americans already distrust powerful institutions, even the appearance of a special access can create lasting damage. And that's where we turn next. When people talk about why trust in Washington has collapsed, they often point to one thing: the feeling that there are 2 different sets of rules, one set for ordinary Americans and another set for people with power, influence, and connections. And this is where criticism surrounding Mitch McConnell and his wife, Elaine Chao, enters the conversation. Elaine Chao has had a long and successful career in government. She served as Secretary of Labor under President George W. Bush and later as Secretary of Transportation under President Donald Trump. But her family's business connections and her role as a powerful government official created controversy and scrutiny over the years. Critics focused especially on her family's shipping company, Foremost Group, which has extensive business connections involving China. To critics, this raised uncomfortable questions. How should America handle political leaders whose families have major international business relationships? Can someone make decisions involving America's interests while their family has financial connections overseas? Now, it is important to separate criticism from proven wrongdoing. Investigations into Chao's conduct did not result in any criminal charges. For many critics, the issue was never really about whether something was illegal. The issue was about trust, the appearance of influence, the appearance of access, and whether America's political class lives by the same standards as the people they represent. And this is where the criticism of Mitch McConnell expands beyond one person or one family. For decades, McConnell represented the Washington establishment, a world where politicians, lobbyists, corporations, and powerful organizations operate in the same circles. Supporters argue that this is simply how politics works. You build relationships, you negotiate, you bring resources back home. But critics argue the system itself has become the problem. Because when politicians spend decades surrounded by Washington insiders, they risk losing connection with the people outside of that bubble. We're talking the farmer trying to survive, the factory worker trying to keep a job, the small business owner struggling with rising costs. These Americans don't care about political strategy. They care about whether their government is making their lives better. Another issue that has followed Mitch McConnell in recent years is one that extends far beyond him: question of age and leadership in American politics. In 2023, Americans watched several public moments where McConnell appeared to freeze during press conferences. Those incidents, combined with previous falls and health concerns, created a national debate about whether America's political leaders should face stronger expectations for transparency. McConnell's office stated that he was medically cleared and capable of continuing his duties. But critics continued to argue that American people deserve more than carefully crafted statements. They argue that serving in one of the most powerful positions in government requires a level of openness because the decisions made in Washington affect everyday Americans. And this debate is not only about Mitch McConnell, it includes presidents, senators, and members of Congress across both parties. Because America has increasingly watched leaders remain in office well into advanced age, and voters from across the political spectrum asking the same question. When does experience become wisdom, and when does it become an obstacle to new leadership? Maybe the most important part of the Mitch McConnell debate isn't Mitch McConnell himself. Maybe it's what he represents. Because millions of Americans are frustrated with a political system where leaders seem to stay in power forever, while the problem facing the country continues to grow. The national debt keeps increasing. Trust in institutions continue to decline. Americans feel divided, and many communities feel forgotten. Critics argue that Washington has become too focused on maintaining power instead of solving problems. They argue politicians spend more time protecting their positions than protecting the people they represent. And that criticism is why figures like Mitch McConnell became targets of frustration, not because he wasn't effective, but because many Americans believe he was effective at protecting the system they no longer trust. But perhaps the most immediate controversy surrounding Mitch McConnell today is not about his voting record. It's about whether one of the most powerful senators in America is still able to fully carry the responsibilities of his office, and whether the people of Kentucky are getting the answers they deserve. Over the last several years, concerns about McConnell's health have become impossible to ignore. The public has witnessed moments that raise concerns about his ability to continue serving, including his well-known freezing episodes during press conferences in 2023, previous falls, and ongoing speculation about his condition. McConnell and his office have maintained that he is capable of performing his duties. But critics argue that when someone holds a position of enormous influence, the public deserves transparency, because this isn't just about one person. The decisions made by Senate leadership affect every person in Kentucky, from veterans and farmers to families dealing with inflation, healthcare costs, and economic uncertainty. And that brings us to the question facing many Kentuckians. If their senior senator is unable to fully participate, what happens next? For decades, McConnell's seniority has been one of Kentucky's biggest advantages in Washington. His supporters argue that his influence brought federal investment, defense funding, infrastructure projects, and resources back to the state. But critics argue that relying on one longtime political figure creates vulnerability. What happens when that person is no longer able to operate at full capacity? Who makes sure Kentucky's priorities are still being represented? Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear has called for more information and transparency regarding McConnell's condition. And regardless of political party, the concern is shared by many observers. Kentuckians deserve clarity about whether their elected officials are able to perform the duties they were chosen to perform. Then came another issue that fueled criticism and speculation. Reports that his wife, Elaine Chao, met with Chinese Vice President Han Jing shortly after questions surrounding McConnell's health created a political firestorm. For critics of the McConnell family, the timing raised uncomfortable questions. They ask, at a moment when Americans were demanding transparency about a powerful senator's condition, why was attention focused on meetings involving Chinese officials? Now, critics and supporters view this situation very differently. Supporters argue that the meeting was connected to a long-standing relationship, diplomacy, and previously planned activities. But critics see it completely differently. Given the family's history of scrutiny over China connection, the optics were very damaging. And this is an important distinction. The question many Americans are asking is not necessarily whether a specific action was illegal. The question is whether the situation reinforces a larger concern they already have about political elites, foreign connections, and public trust. And maybe that is the big biggest issue here. Trust. For many Americans, the frustration is not limited to Mitch McConnell. It is about a political system where leaders often remain in power for decades, where health questions are sometimes handled behind closed doors, and where ordinary citizens feel they are the last to receive answers. Kentucky voters are now left with a difficult question. How do you respect a leader's decades of service while also demanding accountability for whether they can continue serving? Because leadership is not just about holding a title. Leadership is about being present, being accountable, and being able to fulfill the responsibilities entrusted to you by the people. For Kentucky, the question is bigger than Mitch McConnell. It's about representation, it's about transparency, and it's about whether America's political system has created a situation where too much power is concentrated in too few hands. And that may ultimately be the question that defines the final chapter of Mitch McConnell's career. Not just what he accomplished, but whether the system he helped build can adapt when the people demand something different. So how should history judge Mitch McConnell? That depends on who you ask. His supporters will argue that he was one of the most consequential conservative leaders of the modern era. They will point to the Supreme Court, they will point to his ability to defend Republican priorities, and they will point to his ability to accomplish goals when others couldn't. But his critics will tell a different story. They will say Mitch McConnell became the perfect example of a Washington system that values political victories over everyday struggles. They will say he represented an era of Republican politics that focuses on institutions and international markets while working class Americans felt left behind. They will say America does not need more politicians who know how to win the game. It needs leaders willing to change the game. The story of Mitch McConnell is not simply the story of one senator. It is a story of Washington itself, a place where power is carefully protected, where influence is carefully built, where political survival can sometimes become the ultimate goal. But democracy is not measured by how long someone can hold power. It is measured by whether that power actually serves the people. And that is the question that will define Mitch McConnell's legacy. Was he a brilliant strategist who protected conservative principles? Or was he the symbol of a political system that Americans increasingly want to leave behind? The answer depends on who you ask. But one thing is certain. The era of Mitch McConnell changed American politics forever. I'm Chomps. This is Chomps Talks, and thank you for watching. Have a great day. Bye.